Welcome to the Sermon in the Valley with Pastor Rob Eller. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends and family. Thank you. Welcome back to the Sermon in the Valley, everybody. Pastor Rob Eller here with your Thursday episode, a special one today. We're going to talk about faith and science, and with me today I have Thomas Johnston and Jaren Summers. They are fourth-year students at Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Columbus, Ohio, both serving on internship, and both are up-and-coming experts in the field of science and faith and how they work together. They have written journal articles. They serve on various committees regarding this topic. So welcome to the podcast, Thomas and Jaren.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Jaren. Thank you, Rob. Glad to be here as well.
So let's get started on this. We'll start with a very basic question here. How do the two of you see faith and science like intersecting both today and even throughout history?
Jaren, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the biggest mistakes I think that the Christian church ever made was in the Enlightenment period, where the church, a large portion of the church, decided that faith and science could not go together, that you either believe in creation by God or you believe in evolution. There's no in between. And the reason I say that is because I believe that creation is a revelation from God. So I believe that we can understand God through creation, and that science helps us to learn about God in a diverse set of ways while also being seen through the lens of faith and Scripture. So I believe science and faith can work together, faith keeping a check on science's ethics, and science helping us to uncover truths about the Bible and about creation and help us to grow our understanding of God.
Yeah, I think one of the, Jaren, you hit it on the head, is kind of just taking a look around us and seeing how God has revealed God's self through the lens of nature, through the lens of the ever-expanding cosmos, through the ever-discovering of the seas, as well as how we find that connected in the Bible, and how do we have conversation between science and faith. That I tend to look at the two as conversation partners, as science and faith are on a date, and they are they're wanting to know more about each other, but they're doing it together in mutuality. One is not taking precedent over another, and especially in North America, within the United States, science and faith have always been at odds with one another. And recently there's been a lot of conversation between the two.
Yeah, I've always felt that, I see science and faith as kind of like two sides of the same coin. Like mm-hmm. Whatever science can't explain, faith can answer that. And then vice versa, whatever faith can't, science can. Like, mm-hmm. And kind of just like how some things can be melded together, like the whole idea of the Big Bang, for instance, like how the universe and everything was created through just one spark moment where everything just, the universe expanded on you and you have it. Well, the way I see that is, well, something just can't happen without something causing it. So what caused the Big Bang to happen? So yes, the Big Bang happened, but then God was the one behind it. Mm-hmm. And all that time of like everything being created, we look at the creation story in Genesis, well, both stories, because there's two of them together. Mm-hmm. The literalist view is to think that, okay, yeah, the earth was created in 6 days and God rested on the seventh. But is it really 6 days as we know it today? Or is it maybe that's just an allegory for all the thousands and millions of years it took for the earth to develop from a molten blob to what it is today?
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right on that. And even 2 Peter says that God's time is not our time. One day to the Lord is 1,000 years, and so on and so forth. But what I also think faith does for us is science can only get us so far. And faith really helps us find meaning and purpose. And what I mean by that is science is very helpful in uncovering the world and talking about how things happen, but it doesn't really talk about why or who, why things happen or who causes those things to happen. And so science traditionally, especially a Newtonian kind of mechanistic understanding, leaves us kind of out in the cold. Well, the universe is this cold, dreary place that doesn't really care about you. You are just a speck of dust among, other countless thousands and millions of planets and stars, and nothing matters. But what I believe faith does is tell us that actually creation's a good thing, and God does care about us, and so we should care about one another and about creation.
Mm-hmm. Jaren, you highlighted it. Well, it's that mutuality. It's that we tend to think of things on our time, but really God is past, present, future simultaneously. That we are looking towards the end. We are looking towards that new creation, and science provides some aspect of what does all that mean.
Yeah, because when we think about a lot of things, we see everything as gifts from God, and so wouldn't science be along that same line? No, it's a better understanding of what God created. I mean, granted, yes, we're not supposed to have all the knowledge of God, and so that's why there are some things in science that are just way outside of our grasp. But still, it's giving us a better feeling and understanding of what God has created in the world. Go ahead.
Ed, Rob, you hit on that. It's the faith-seeking understanding. It's that we're not starting from a place of knowledge to reach the destination. We're starting from a place of faith, that trust in God, the God who created the heavens and the earth, and that we are then using our reason in conjunction with our faith. We're using our mind that God gave us in conjunction with our faith to know more about God's creation, while also acknowledging that we can't get to that final destination. We're only getting glimpses. That final destination comes when God's heavenly kingdom manifests itself on earth, when the new heaven and new earth come together to form that new Eden.
Yeah, I mean, we're all disciples. So, and what is the true meaning of being a disciple? It's being a student. And so we want to learn, we want to grow in that knowledge. And so there's no limit as to what we're supposed to learn. It's just we're supposed to learn. So that is exploring all the creation and exploring how it happened. That's the big thing of science. The thing with science is it's the how things are happening. And so, I mean, we should be wanting to do that.
I don't see how we could not do that. I mean, if you look at, I see science as a good gift from God to understand creation. And creation in Genesis is called good, and at the very end, God calls it very good. And so I don't understand how we could just say, well, we don't need to better understand creation, when we are called by God to be stewards of creation. And the best way to be stewards is to grow in our scientific understanding, to take care of creation and our neighbors.
I'll piggyback off that too. We are at the pinnacle of creation. At the end of Genesis 1, humans are the last one made. So what better scientific experiment, what better way to do science and faith is to look at us, to look at what role have humans played in society, in what ways, where do we move forward? Where have we moved back? And how does the pinnacle of humanity, the little lower than the angels, relate to everything else? And I think it would be neglectful of us not to consider that. I would also like to put out a kind of a pitfall with looking at science and faith, especially if we have them in conflict with one another, is certainty. The antithesis of faith is not doubt, but certainty. When we are very certain in religious doctrines and dogmas to the point that we're not able to look at another side, science goes in the same direction. When we're very certain to the point of blind faith, then we're not able to faithfully engage in conversation with one another.
Yeah, and that we see that a lot when it comes down to creation and the whole idea of the Big Bang versus the Genesis story, and how those people see them as odds with each other. We have the people that are within like the conservative side of Christianity who believe it's got to be creationism. It happened in 7 days. That's it. And then there are those in the scientific community that think no, it was Big Bang. Nothing started that. It was just the Big Bang. And then the middle ground you get in there is I haven't seen it brought up in recent years, but it's the idea of intelligent design. I mean, that was the whole concept of trying to meld creationism with the Big Bang and putting those two together. And I wish that theory would be pushed a little more, maybe not necessarily within the realm of schools, because intelligent design was conceived as a way to try to make creationism more palatable in a public school setting. But if you really take it, you can look at it as, okay, maybe these two can work together, and we don't have to have that divide between the two.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that you can find many Christians out there, especially Christian scientists, who are capable of holding both evolution and theology in both hands, or can take their faith seriously while also taking science seriously, and actually finding that both complement one another.
I just want to clarify, you mean scientists who are Christians, not the actual religion Christian scientists, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure we clarify that, since there is that faith line called Christian scientists. So I just want to make sure we clarify that. So how's pop culture played into effect? I mean, like, I think back to like the Dan Brown novel series, and the one that comes to mind is Angels and Demons, because that was made into a movie with Tom Hanks, and science and faith became part of the plot line for that, because it was the whole idea of a Catholic priest who was a scientist who helped discover the God particle. And so how has pop culture played into this?
That's such a great question, and I think that you can find pop culture spanning a wide spectrum. For example, one of the things I remember in high school was the infamous or famous debate between Bill Nye the Science Guy and Ken Ham. Ken Ham being the director of Answers in Genesis, which is a young Earth creation organization that believes the Earth was created in a literal 6 days. And I remember that debate was being talked about all over school, even though neither of these individuals had any specialty in astronomy or biology. Bill Nye's an engineering by trade, and he was famous for his Disney show called Bill Nye the Science Guy. And Ken Ham does not have and has more theological training than science training. So I found that debate to be really interesting, especially because it seemed to be more for publicity than to actually deal with the issues.
I have actually been to the Ark where they actually had that debate, and I bring that up because that is an example of the science and faith narrative in conflict with one another. but I would say, as Jaren said, pop culture, you can look at it from, it's a very, very much of a spectrum. Most of the media that I have seen, particularly on streaming networks like Netflix and Hulu, there tends to be more of that conflict narrative. Or they're looking at science through a very narrow lens. There is, I was in college, I watched a show called The Flood. And the rationale behind the flood was, we can definitively prove that Noah's flood happened just by looking at the geologic rocks in the Grand Canyon. That we can say that there is a global flood just by looking at the rocks in the Grand Canyon. So it as Jaren mentioned, there's a spectrum, but conflict sells.
Yeah, it does.
I don't want to be flippant with that, but conflict does sell because people are motivated by particular ideologies, whether that be faith only, science only, and there's no room for conversation.
Yeah.
So pop culture can be a blessing in that it invites further conversation while also being a boon in shutting down conversation. So one thing as leaders in the church is being aware of the content that's out there and providing helpful resources for our parishioners who come to us with those questions.
Yeah, and the ultimate boon for this conversation is when you get the show and history channel, which I don't even know why it's on there, Ancient Aliens, where they explain anything that can't be explained by science. It's not faith, it's aliens.
You realize that the aliens were at the Reformation, right? During the 30 Years' War.
that show just drives me nuts, and I don't know how it well, I do know how it made it on TV because it's conflict, it's controversial, and it's so outlandish that people think, oh, maybe that actually is true. But just the fact that that's where you see faith twisted so much that if it can't be explained by science, well then it's aliens. I remember that debate being publicized. I didn't watch it, but I remember that big thing because also I think Neil deGrasse Tyson got drawn into that as well, which again, he's an astrophysicist, not anything to do with. I mean, he is a scientist, brilliant scientist, but his field, his realm is astrophysics, and so that's not really within. I mean, that does cover a lot of the faith stuff, but in terms of creation stuff, not so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Did I hear somebody talking about scientists and specialty fields when talking about science and faith? I just hopped off because I found a book.
Yes, I was mentioning Neil deGrasse Tyson, because he's an astrophysicist, and he got drawn into the whole creationist debate with Bill Nye as well, because they're part of the Planetary Society together, and so but it's not so much really staying within your field of specialty. It's making sure you know what you're talking about, and that really is the case with Bill Nye. I mean, nothing against him. I love Bill Nye. I grew up watching his show. My kids, I'll put reruns of it on, and they'll watch it. But yeah, he was an engineer by trade, and so that's a lot of this creation stuff is not within his realm of expertise.
Yeah,
I would agree with that, and I would also push back just a tad bit, if I may. That is correct. Dr. Tyson and Bill Nye both have advanced degrees in respective scientific fields. I also think and believe that they had to expand their purview because they're academics. They had to expand their purview beyond what they studied to know what's up, but also realizing that different scientific things come into conflict with that science comes into conflict with its own science, and that they're forming each other. They're forming and informing each other. So they had to essentially have all of their bases covered, much like pastors, in a way that we are pastors in training. We're not just studying Bible or theology, pastoral care. We're also generalists with pop culture, politics, what's happening in other countries. We're generalists. So even while scientists may have like their specialty, they are also aware of other scientific developments as well, even though it's outside of their purview.
Yeah.
The one scientist who is somewhat sympathetic to the science and faith conversation was Carl Sagan.
Yep.
I want to preface that Carl Sagan was an agnostic. He did, however, say that the people leading the conversation on climate change should be the church. He said religious, but not just the church, but religious organizations in general that have a mandate written within their sacred text, within their holy scriptures of this is what y'all say and believe, so why aren't y'all leading the charge? Sagan was at least sympathetic to religion. He didn't entirely agree with it. He was more of a natural theologian, so what do you see in nature? He did in his lecture series in Scotland talk about his search for God, whatever that looks like. So Carl Sagan was, in my mind, one of the last few scientists who was at least open to having a conversation with Christianity or organized religion in that matter. Neil deGrasse Tyson tends to lean a little bit more on that conflict narrative. He actually, it's heavily implied in some of his writings, in some of his books.
Final thoughts for this episode, gentlemen, as we wrap up here?
I think it's important to encourage individuals to learn as much as they can about science and the world around them. I think that one that helps us increase our appreciation for what God has done in creation. For example, what science is now coming to understand is that there is so much order in the universe that it's very difficult for it to come about randomly. For example, if the globe of the Earth was farther away from the sun by just a little bit or tilted in just a different way, life would be impossible. And that it seems that everything has been geared towards life in this universe to an extent. And so I think science is really wrestling with this right now, and I think that's where faith can come in, while at the same time I think science can help our faith be more intellectually sound and also more applicable to what we're facing in our real world.
I want to highlight and echo what Jaren said. The Christian tradition, and not just the Christian tradition, but Jewish tradition, Muslim, Islamic tradition, have been doing science in their own way, but maybe not the way that we think about science in our post-Enlightenment period. But whenever, particularly in the Christian tradition, when we're talking about creeds, when we're talking about some of these complex doctrines, we're using science. We're using science as a way of making sense of something that's not that's unexplainable, that can't be codified. I was reading a book in undergrad by a youth pastor from Lutheran Seminary, and he talked about the best use of science by Christian theologians was explaining the doctrine of the Trinity as found in the Nicene Creed. that you have these early church fathers trying to make sense of God the Son, God the Spirit, and how they all, and God the Father, how they all work together as three persons in one being, and one being in three persons, how they all work together. And this pastor was like, this is science. One thing that, as Jaren mentioned earlier in the episode, was how the Christian church post-Enlightenment lost its sense of theology, but trying to find things that were kind of trying to explain using science, putting them in conflict. But for Christians throughout the centuries, theology has been our best description of science. And looking forward is, how do we then bring this sense of love and awe and wonder of theology back into our modern discourse? How do we then make science more applicable without seeing it in conflict with faith?
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on here today. This will not be the last time the two of you will be on here. We'll cover more science and faith, more in depth, and bring the two of you back on for other various topics that we had talked about before. As always, for all of you out there listening, if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends and family, spread the good news for all to hear. God's peace be with all of you. Have a blessed day.